What's cooking? Food and farm policy in the digital age. And today we have a great webinar about agriculture in the times of COVID-19. How can digital solutions help? For those of you that don't know me, I'm Julian Lampieri. I'm the manager of the Global Engagement Unit in the Agriculture and Food Practice of the World Bank. Now, we have three very distinguished presenters today, and they're each going to speak to you for about 12 minutes, and then we'll have a conversation where they'll answer your questions after Katerina and Maria Claudia have provided some discussion points on their presentations. So the first presenter will be Jorge Bedoya, and he's an economist from Bogota and holds a master's degree from Harvard University, and he is currently the president of the Colombian Agriculture Society. He was also at various times, I think if I remember correctly, with the Ministry of Agriculture.
Of Defense.
And then, thank you, Jorge, and you can say a few more words about your background when you start. And we have Kim Wagner, who is founding partner of TBGD Partners, and she is also a farmer and owner of Stoutridge Vineyard in the Hudson Valley, New York. She was a partner at Flagship Pioneering and president and chief operating officer of SIBO Technologies, a flagship of Venture Labs company. For those of you that may remember, the what's his name? Ignacio came and presented last year at the bank on Flagship Pioneering, and we've had quite some interaction with SIBO over the years. And last but not least, we have Christine Gould, who has dedicated her career to making ag innovation more open and collaborative. She created Thought for Food to inspire young people to get involved in developing the solutions for their future. Christine holds an MPA in Science and Technology from Columbia University. So welcome, all three of you. We have quite an audience of people who are thirsting for practical ideas on how they can help countries through this situation. We believe that the current crisis is really a symptom of a food system that needs to be more resilient and is really not fit for purpose today. And that's why we're seeing the kinds of problems that we're seeing when it comes to food security and food systems. So we have a real tremendous opportunity to rethink and reboot that whole system and build it back greener, better. So with no further ado, let me pass the floor to Jorge. 12 minutes, sir, please. Thank you.
Julian. Thank you, Maria Claudia, for inviting me here. I'm very delighted to have the opportunity to speak to all of you. I'm going to share just 2 slides on what has been the Colombian experience so far amid the coronavirus crisis. Next. Vivek, next, please. Next. Okay, so first, let me summarize what is going on here in Colombia. When the national lockdown started, we were privileged as the agricultural sector because this is one of the sectors, as well with the health industry and the physicians, to be considered as an essential activity. What that means is that from day one, we were able to continue to operate and to provide our food to all the 48 to 50 million Colombian consumers that we have. And what was very important in the regulation that the government issued was that all ag-related activities were permitted. And I mean by that everything: transportation, packaging, technical assistance for our producers, distributions not only of our products, but also of our inputs, veterinary services, and so forth. Third, the 2020 estimates in terms of the production that we were having in Colombia was in a condition of normality for our country, a economy growing at a growth rate around 3.1%. So what just happened is that we lost our consumers, but the food supply was in the condition of a normality for a country like mine. most economic activities, that means our consumers, came into lockdown. So what that means is that everyone, and I will explain that a little bit later, reduce drastically the consumption of food around the month of March, and of course what we've experienced in the month of April. And something that affected us in the beginning was the lack of coordination between our governors and our mayors with the national government, because the national government issued the regulation to make the opportunity and the possibility to the agricultural sector to operate, but the mayors and the governors decided to implement some measures that restricted in some places the mobility of our products, our trucks, our equipment, and that created some shortcuts in terms of the supply, but it has been already resolved. Next. In terms of the initial effects that we experienced in Colombia, let me give you the following numbers. In our country, the labor force is around 22 million citizens out of 50 million citizens that Colombia has. 11 million of them are informal, and most of them are under the lockdown. So what that means is that we face a very dramatically reduction of consumption of food in this country, because more than 11 million people were in their houses, and of course they didn't have any income, some of them, most of the people that are in the informal market, and of course the closure of some other traditional distribution channels like the restaurants, hotels, schools, universities, and so forth, created a serious challenge and a serious problem to our producers. In addition to that, the consumer behavior changed. Why? Because they decided to save money because of the uncertainty of losing their jobs. Also, as I said before, informal activities, they didn't have any income. And the possibility, regardless that we have the possibility to go to the shops, to the supermarkets, people were afraid of getting infected with the COVID-19. So that reduced not only the frequency of getting their food in the supermarkets, but also the decisions in terms of what products they were going to acquire or to purchase at the facilities. In addition to that, the perishable products like the fruits, tomatoes, lettuce, onions, potatoes, chicken, pork, fish, they were reduced in the pattern of consumption of our households. On the contrary, because in developing nations, most of the people, they don't have enough income, they decided to increase the consumption of products like eggs and rice because they are cheap and the nutritional content is very nice or very well for their own needs. And one of the things that affected more our producers is something that is structural to Colombia, is that most of our small producers, they are not vertically integrated and they lack economies of scales. What that means is that they don't have the possibility to go from farm to fork, and with the changes in the pattern of consumption and the isolation of people in their houses, of course, that creates a market opportunity. But for those producers who do not have that structure, of course, it creates a problem. Next. Thank you. By March and by the end of April, we have 1.5 more million Colombians who lost their income. So the unemployment rate is increasing dramatically. We do not have the numbers of April so far, but our estimates is that at least more than 1 million Colombians, in addition to the 1.5 in March, will lose their jobs. And that's, of course, a very bad news, not only for the country, but also for our sector. Excuse me, because it was repeated. But I would like to say that in the consolidation of the common economic impact, what we are seeing is, of course, a reduction in consumption. Now, some sectors are opening again, and that it creates an opportunity for our producers. But still, we have many challenges ahead of us, because one of the most critical sectors for us, which are the restaurants, hotels, schools, universities, social clubs, and so forth, will remain closed at least for 6 months. And of course, that's a real problem for our producers. Next. Next. Some success stories during the crisis. First of all, small producers through social networks, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, even LinkedIn and Facebook, trying to get their products into the domestic market. That it's an opportunity, and some of them have taken advantage of that opportunity. But within the social sectors that have the largest income, per capita income, because of course most of the Colombians they are poor, so they don't have the opportunity to get like the some platforms to acquire the products, and of course that creates a problem. WhatsApp business accounts for selling animal protein. Just to give you an example, in the city of Bogota, the what we call asaderos in Spanish, like roasted chicken restaurants, it's one of the most important channels of distributions of chicken in Bogota, which is the capital of Colombia. That was one of the sectors that was closed in the beginning of the lockdown. So chicken companies decided to open their business accounts in WhatsApp to try to sell their own chicken products. Some of them have been successful in that, but most of them, they have not. And of course, our producers and our associations have been able to provide technical assistance to our producers through webinars, through Zoom conferences, WebEx, and so forth. And that has been an advantage in terms of the digital world, bringing the technical assistance to our producers. The post-pandemic scenario for us, looking ahead in time, is of course the most important thing for us is the producer's health, because those are hundreds of thousands of Colombians taking care of the supply of food to our country. Second, we need our consumers back. That is our major challenge in the months ahead. The challenge in changes in pattern of consumption, the social distancing, when you go to the restaurant, when you go to the supermarket, or if you prefer to stay at home, creates not only a challenge for us, but as an opportunity as well for our producers, how to disseminate and to make scalable the technical assistance for our producers through digital platforms is something that each of the 22 associations that are under the organization that I represent are thinking about and working on. And of course, as I said before, how to develop a stronger strategy, what we call from farm to fork. That means how to create opportunities to our producers, prioritizing the small ones so that they can take their products out to the market, but not to the wholesaling channel of distribution, but trying to get closer to the opportunities. And of course, new market opportunities are arising. The economic sectors that are going back to normality and that require food. For instance, the construction sector in Colombia employs more than 1.5 million people, and most of them are getting back into business as we speak. So they require food 3 times per day, and the companies that are in the construction business, they require catering. So that's a huge opportunity for our producers, but it will not resolve the problems because we have millions of people out of the economic market. And finally, digital solutions and the ag sector. What I would say is, first of all, how to get the producer closer to the consumer. That's something that is structural now because of the social distancing and the new patterns of consumption. Second, market information. I think it's obvious, but I would like to state that in this country, we don't have as much information as we would like to provide to our producers so they know how the prices are going, how the cost of production is going, and of course, what are the market opportunities that they will have. Education in rural areas, because I speak not only on behalf of our producers, but also the rural communities, and we need to think about the children and the people that are in their houses now, and possibly they can go again to schools, but since we now have to increase the distance between students in a classroom, that means an opportunity for getting into the digital education, not only for young people in the cities, but also in the municipalities of Colombia. And finally, how to consistently provide the technical assistance to our producers, because now they have to be aware of the challenges of continue to be productive, competitive, and that requires a lot of assistance from the associations and even from the government in the field. Thank you, Julian. I think I'll finish, and I'll be able to take any questions after the rest of the people present.
Thank you so much, Jorge, for that very useful insight into what's going on in Colombia, and amazing, all those people out of work, and the way you framed the need for food and the kind of response that's being put together at the farm level. So let's move on to Kim. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to join you. I don't have any slides, so you get to either look at me or look at others. But I guess I'll start by saying that the farmer and the farm economy in the U.S. was already in a bit of weakness before COVID showed up. That was primarily driven by export market issues and some other economics within the country. So we'll kind of put that aside, but realize that the agricultural sector was already under some level of stress, and immigration of farm labor was part of that. Remember that the United States is a republic of 50 individual state entities. And when it comes to things like food, and when it comes to things like opening and not opening, and can you work and can't you work, and unemployment insurance and the like, that all happens at the state level. It doesn't happen at the federal level. So imagine 50 state governors, each with a slightly different philosophy around public health and food and economics. And that whole collection becomes the United States. Before COVID, US had the least expensive food on the planet and the most plentiful food on the planet. And I'm not going to talk about anything that we're importing. I'll keep the conversation because it's complex enough if you just talk about food in the U.S. and moving the food around the U.S. We had an extraordinarily sophisticated process. It had a lot of resiliency built into it for things that we thought about, like weather, like disease, meaning pest disease in crops and animals, not disease amongst humans. And it was an extraordinarily refined supply chain to the point where there actually was a fair bit of digitization. I mean, there's procurement systems and inventory systems and machine learning that would predict not only weather and crop yields, but also demand from the consumer side. Pre-COVID, more than 50% of the food in the United States was consumed outside the home, either as part of a restaurant, takeout, food service, in everything from schools to prisons and hospitals. More than 50% of the food was consumed outside. And that food is consumed, prepared in volume, right? You know, if you think about what a restaurant buys versus what an individual buys. Right now, we are in the United States consuming 70% of our food in the home. It is a complete flip of the supply chain. And you think, okay, that's okay. You just send food to retailers rather than sending food to food service. Well, it's not that easy. Retailers buy eggs in boxes, 30 dozen at a time. Consumers buy eggs a dozen at a time, or maybe 2 dozen at a time, but they definitely don't buy 30 dozen at a time. And a lot of the reason why the food system is so efficient and, quite frankly, so safe in the United States is we have this entire supply chain that has regulatory and policy and legal rules around it. So you could argue, well, why don't we just send the big boxes of eggs to food stores? Well, it turns out in many states there's a law against selling individual eggs to consumers. For safety reasons and for cleanliness reasons, eggs have to be put in a sanitary container and sold in given quantities, half a dozen, a dozen, a dozen and a half. I mean, there's laws in states. So one interesting kind of quirky thing that happened, and this happened all around the country, is the state of Pennsylvania had to very quickly pass a law saying it was legal to sell individual eggs to consumers in stores. Because there were plenty of eggs, but we ran out of egg cartons. So believe it or not, right now there's a shortage of 12 egg cartons in the United States. And this has become a major issue. To the point where a friend of mine is one of the largest producers of eggs in the Northeast, and they are trying to come together with all of the other egg producers in the United States who are farmers, they're chicken farmers, to agree that they will all use the same carton so that one factory can be fully dedicated to the production of egg cartons so that we have enough eggs in the store. There are plenty of eggs. We just don't have the way of getting them to the store. And so what COVID kind of identified was a resiliency issue in our ability to adapt. And part of the reason we couldn't adapt is because our system became so efficient, there was no waste. So there were no extra egg cartons. And so I think one of the things that the US can tell the world is, yes, you can become extraordinarily efficient and you can become extraordinarily safe. But that efficiency and that low cost and safety comes at a price, which is if anything upsets the system that you didn't expect, you can't move very quickly to fix it. So this plays out in many other situations. You know, if you just think about chicken, regular humans go to the food store and will buy, say, 2 pounds of chicken at a time. A restaurant will buy chicken in 20-pound increments. And if you think about the box that chicken comes in, those are 10-pound bags, 2 10-pound bags in a box. And it's very efficient. We can ship it, cold chain, everything's happy. Well, my local food store started selling chicken parts in 10-pound bags. And consumers didn't know what to do with it. I mean, what do you do with 10 pounds of chicken? Like, do you freeze it? And then, by the way, it wasn't nice little chicken tenders and breasts, you know, that people were used to. It was literally quartered chickens, which if you're a chef, you know what to do with. If you're a regular consumer in the United States, you know, we know how to microwave. And so actually one of the very interesting things is on lockdown, many people have learned to cook. So it's been quite entertaining to see that happen. But what it does kind of tee up is that right now for, you know, digital and food in the United States, there's plenty of machine learning. A lot of the supply chain has been digitized, but nobody had a training set that says you go from 55% of the food consumed outside the home to 30% of the food consumed outside the home in a 1-week period, you know, with no sliding scale. You know, so those kinds of things just weren't programmed in. The unemployment in the United States is at an all-time high. It has never been this high as a percentage basis ever in the history of the country. Over 30 million jobs have been lost in this short period of time, in a matter of weeks. And many people are suffering from COVID. And so that created the other problem that's probably hit the news more internationally, which is in harvesting plants for animals, there's been hot spots of COVID such that you can't actually run the facility. You can't run the facility to harvest the animals and then process the meat. And that has resulted in thousands of animals being euthanized just before harvest. Again, our system is exceptionally efficient. If you're a swine farmer, you know how many market weight hogs you are allocated to send to harvest every week for the entire year. And you know which are the heavy weeks and which are the light weeks. And that goes all the way back into the breeding system. So you will breed a certain number of cows, knowing a certain number of weeks later, you will be responsible for delivering 30,000 hogs into the system. So when all of a sudden these very large processing plants come down, you've got hogs and you have no place to put them. And remember, there's a lot of rules, and they're very important rules around biocontainment. which controls a lot of animal disease in the United States. And so it's not like you can just put them out in a pasture because we have rules against that. So long-winded way of saying that I think the lesson from the US is a very highly efficient system that is based on history and recent history, meaning like the last 30 years and not the last 100 years, can create a flexible but very actually unadaptable system. And there's a lot of pain in kind of putting that right. I'll stop there and happy to answer questions at the end.
Great, thank you so much, Kim. That was excellent and really some insights into how, well, efficiency, I guess, is the enemy of resilience. It'd be very interesting in the follow-up conversation to get into a little bit of debate about how can we make these systems, how can you design these systems so it is more resilient, more adaptable, and how you can use technology in the supply chain to do that. So let's move on to our third speaker, Christine. Welcome, and the floor is yours. You have
Great. Yeah, thank you all so much for giving me the chance to be here to talk about some of the exciting ways that digital technologies are being used around the world to dive into the issues and challenges that have been so eloquently outlined by Jorge and Kim. As mentioned in the introduction, I have the pleasure of working with millennials and Gen Zs, 25,000 of them in 175 countries. And as young people, they are digital natives. So working with digital technologies and, kind of translating those technologies into locally relevant solutions is like breathing to them. They're naturally adept at creating and adopting these types of digital solutions for agriculture, whether it be, mobile technologies and SMS, GIS and data analysis, AI, IoT, remote sensing, you name it, this is, second nature to them. And what we've seen is that they've been quick, and keep in mind, I am working with entrepreneurs, right? So entrepreneurs are very action focused. And so what we've seen in our community is that our teams have been very quick to jump in and start to build solutions and also to share those solutions. So to your last question that you asked, Julian, about how do we kind of like build in resilience, I think there's an exciting opportunity here to actually create more know-how sharing and also sharing of learnings and failures so that we can actually scale impact, right? Not through scaling of one technology, but through scaling of experiences, ideas, know-how, and more. And we're seeing that with today's young people who are naturally collaborative and open, that this is happening. And we've actually, in my organization, even set up a platform to facilitate that called the COVID Collaboration Collective. And we've seen that they're jumping in and saying, hey, we need to connect growers with consumers. This is happening in India. They're even changing legislation here. Who else has experienced this? And, within literally seconds in our WhatsApp group, we had people from Ecuador and Colombia chiming in saying, here's what's happened here. Oh, hey, I have this API. I'm going to open source it so you can use it. And this is the kind of really exciting kind of transformational impact that we're seeing happen in the TFF community. I wanted to highlight a few examples. So we run every year an innovation challenge called the Thought for Food Challenge, which is our big magnet that, attracts these next-gen innovators to build solutions and kind of, become part of our global movement. And finalists are selected after this challenge to go through an acceleration program and an incubation program. And we currently have 15 teams taking part. And I wanted to share a little bit about what these teams have done in the wake of COVID to pivot actually and address a lot of the challenges that have been outlined by previous speakers. So one team called Aglonera in Indonesia, they were set up originally to basically sell produce from rural farmers to food cart owners in Indonesia. Their founder actually grew up, his mother was a food truck owner, and she was getting up at 3 a.m. every morning, to go source her produce. So he wanted to solve this problem for her and other food cart owners, and built his business to kind of, source at scale and create a marketplace for food cart owners. But of course, with quarantine, the customer base dried up, and actually also some of their team members contracted COVID themselves and were hospitalized. But that did not stop them from logging in on their phones to take part in our digital virtual academy, and even to take action to pivot on the fly. And now they are selling directly to consumers. So the way that they've done that is actually through some of the stuff that Jorge mentioned, like WhatsApp, and through word of mouth. They were able to quickly and efficiently, move. And they even started doing the delivery services themselves for a period of time. But once the scale got to be, too big, and they were, only two guys, they partnered with a local NGO so that they could more effectively make these deliveries and, make sure that farmers were able to connect with consumers. They've also been working right now around kind of bulk discounts, which is important because a lot of people are celebrating Ramadan at the moment. So the demand for bulk staples is increasing, and they've even set up a program where leftovers from bulk buying can be donated back to vulnerable populations in the community. So again, this is that kind of like example of the unstoppable nature that young entrepreneurs have when faced with crisis. We have a team in Mexico, Xylanat. They're making a healthy sugar substitute, xylitol. They source their kind of input for that from crop waste. And so due to quarantine, they've had to move their research lab into their home. So they've actually built a DIY lab, which at one point even exploded. They sent us pictures of their exploded makeshift lab. And they've also shared kind of a blueprint for our global community about how to build a biotech lab at your home, and the tips and tricks, things that they've learned, so that others who are trying to do this can accelerate their innovation efforts. They are also pivoting to a B2C model, just to build up a customer base. So when the market actually accelerates and picks up, at some stage, they will have a new business model that will allow them to connect directly with customers. They used to be B2B, of course. And they're also tapping into open source satellite data at the moment to really understand when and where to source their agricultural waste that they use as the input for their proprietary process. And they can also use that data to more accurately assess some of the environmental benefits that they are bringing about due to repurposing crop waste. Another team in Indonesia, Neurofarm, an all-female team actually, they provide a chatbot-based AI-powered mobile app that lets farmers diagnose plant disease and receive instant recommendations to treat their crops. Due to COVID-19, they've had to stop their in-person outreach, their extension services to farmers, but they've quickly pivoted to use mobile apps and social media. And so they're leveraging Facebook, for example, to get out to farmer groups and obtain new customers. They're also using the chance to organize all kinds of topical webinars of interest to their customer base so that they can share knowledge and build their brand. They're also working with other young people from the TFF community around the world to get kind of best practices around social media use and WhatsApp. And given the fact that supply chains are collapsing, they've come up with a B2C initiative that allows people to donate to Neurofarm so that they can buy fresh produce from farmers and deliver it fast and directly to the end consumer. We have a team in the Philippines that is basically creating plant-based food products from food waste and from bumper harvests. And so they actually pivoted before COVID hit, but they've been able to sell their delicious and nutritious meals that have this, sustainable footprint and also an extended shelf life due to some of the processing that they do. And now they're really focusing their efforts on continuing to market using digital tools like WhatsApp and other social media platforms. GeoPotato is a company in Bangladesh that delivers a warning system for potato farmers for potato blight, and they use satellite data and weather stations that they build to tell, where the blight disease is spreading, and farmers subscribe to receive SMS, alerts telling them when to spray their crops. And of course, this has is a great example of, you know, a digital tech that's important right now, and they're continuing to, you know, work and partner with TFF teams around the world to improve their technical capabilities. We have a team in Colombia called Cultivando Futuro. They're the team that I mentioned that has open sourced their API to help teams collect baseline farmer data that they can then use to more accurately match supply and demand. I could go on and on. I wanted to mention one last one, Kua Coffee in Australia. They won our Circular Economy of Food Prize, which we ran in collaboration with Google and Danone and a few other companies. And they actually have a sustainable model where they're sourcing directly from farmers in Uganda, selling coffee at a premium in Australia through coffee houses. However, since the lockdown, everyone is of course working from home, and their sales have dramatically gone down. So we jumped on a call with them, connected them with some industry experts and fellow entrepreneurs from our community. And, you know, they've been inspired to change their strategy and are now selling coffee directly to consumers in their homes, and are even organizing coffee experiences that allow the consumers who are now buying their coffee to understand the, you know, issues and challenges that the farmers in Uganda are facing, so that they can more, you know, be connected in that educational way with the producers of the product that they're enjoying. So going back to, you know, what Jorge was saying, I think, you know, he talked about the fact that there's these challenges of getting producers closer to consumers, about delivering market information, you know, to growers, and educating people in rural areas. And what we're seeing from our vantage point is that young entrepreneurs, they've been doing this, they're continuing to do this, and they are building the solutions right now that allow them to like quickly and actively address these challenges. And they're sharing their ideas and knowledge and know-how, you know, with other entrepreneurs and other markets, so that we can accelerate innovation efforts and really tackle this, you know, unprecedented challenge that our food systems face. So my message is that we should continue to support and invest in these early stage entrepreneurs. Unfortunately, in this, you know, economic recession, that is a hard message, and many investors are actually like pulling away from investing in early stage startups. I hope that that will change, because they need our support more than ever. And I believe we have a lot to learn from these digital natives on the front lines. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Christine, for that very impassioned plea. So, look, we have a great set of presentations we've just been given, which raise a lot of questions. The key and most fundamental one in many ways is where and how should the World Bank be supporting governments to support these efforts. And, you know, on the one hand, we heard a story of a lack of resilience of the system. On the other hand, we heard a story of the system's tremendously resilient and full of people with entrepreneurial ideas that are going to solve the problems and bypass the obstacles. And within that, you know, what is the role of the bank, and where should the bank be investing to create these ecosystems, I guess, is part of the question. So let's turn to Maria Claudia first, and then Katerina, to hear a little bit from each of them on how they see this and the practical implications for the World Bank in our work. Maria Claudia, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Julian. So I will kind of talk a little bit about on the bank side and our experience and what we're doing, also sort of in a more comprehensive kind of approach, because since we cover kind of all the sectors, then we've been taking sort of a comprehensive approach. And, you know, we've been on our side also working with governments, and what we've seen a lot under this crisis is kind of how do we improve really connectivity and affordability of services, of broadband services in particular, to really adjust to really being able to have this increased demand for digital services. So in that sense, you know, our response is supporting governments both in adapting their policies in terms of being able to improve competition and increase bandwidth in many cases, and also thinking about how we can quickly pivot into servicing rural areas in particular, and being able to connect more quickly rural communities, which in particular in the agriculture side is important, given that most of the farming is done by small producers in rural communities, particularly in the developing countries and in our clients. So that's kind of one of the important things that we're looking at. But obviously in parallel, there's the challenge of increasing connectivity, but also the ability for people to use services. So digital skills, what do we do about digital skills and basic literacy in some of these communities? So these are all things that we are currently thinking, and we are kind of very quickly trying to have these issues addressed. I think sorry, I muted myself. I think you're muted, Julian, if you're...
We can hear you fine.
Okay. So I think in that sense, kind of the bank has a lot of opportunities to work coordinated in all of these different aspects, and it's a very quick response. Interestingly enough, we're kind of an institution that moves a bit slower than what you may want us to move, but we've been able to react, particularly in sectors like health and education, fairly quickly. I think now for us, and now part of this discussion is how do we start working and streamlining some of these things and thinking about how digital is impacting other sectors. And I think in that sense, agriculture is kind of the one coming back. We all know also that agriculture in particularly is a bit behind in digitizing as a sector. So I think that's also another challenge that will come up in the shorter medium term. But I think it's very encouraging to hear some of the things Christine and Jorge are saying, that there's a lot of people adapting very quickly to provide sort of solutions. So in our sense, coming from the more digital infrastructure kind of part of the bank is really more about how do we manage to quickly work with operators and governments to improve connectivity and also affordability of service, so that these two things that are foundations are in place and can be quickly improved in the crisis, and also because we all know that this is going to last not only a couple more months, but probably a year or so. So we need to very quickly adapt so that the consequences can be mitigated. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll pass it on to, I guess, Katerina, who can talk a little bit more on the digital technologies and agriculture and some of the things that we have been doing.
Thank you very much, Maria Claudia, and thanks for that bit of news that we're looking at another year of being stuck in our houses. I don't think you got that from the current administration in the U.S., but Katerina, over to you.
Thank you, Julian. First of all, I would like to thank all the speakers for the excellent and insightful presentations. In the unit where I work, Europe and Central Asia, as well as in agriculture global practice in general, we are trying to closely monitor the impacts of COVID-19 on the ag sector. So getting this first-hand perspective on what's going on, particularly in the context of the peculiarities of different markets, is very interesting. So thank you for that. And of course, understanding the role of digital technologies in addressing these emerging constraints in agri-food systems brought about by COVID-19 has been a hot topic for many of us who see digital technologies as key tools in alleviating some of these constraints and imbalances, at least in the short term. But hopefully that would have implications for the long-term digital transformation of the sector as well. As a discussant, I was tasked to say a couple of words about our upcoming global report called Digital Acceleration of Agricultural Transformation, to sort of offer a broader context for the discussion for the role of digital technologies in improving the functionality of agri-food systems. So to be very brief, one of the tasks of the report is to outline the economic framework that assesses how digital technologies can improve efficiency, equity, and environmental sustainability in agri-food systems, both on farm and off farm. And given the complexity of food systems, we believe that the efficiency gains from deploying digital technologies are potentially enormous. And on the farm, we see this efficiency gain happening through producers being able to better use the physical, natural, and human capital, and by leveraging detailed data about farmers' fields and animals, and better exploiting the existing production knowledge. And off-farm, what we see is the potential that digital technologies create to drastically reduce the transaction costs that exist when farmers are trying to access input and output markets. And as we all know, agriculture is more prone to higher transaction costs than many other markets and sectors, and these stem from the peculiarities of the agricultural sector, such as, for example, uncertainty associated with production variability due to weather, pests, and diseases, asset specificities when investment in particular transactions are inherent to that transaction, more increased need for coordination of different actions and transactions, and also difficulties of performance measurement that are inherent to the production process, which makes it more difficult to monitor the performance of the production processes. And all these transaction risks are further exacerbated by what we just heard about with the change in food systems that have this lack of resilience, ironically, due to the improved efficiency. We see the concentration on the upstream and downstream side of the food systems, but we also see this increased segmentation. And this creates risks of leading to massive imbalances in supply and demand in times of crisis, and something that we've clearly seen in the context of COVID-19 and heard today in different markets. So digital agriculture has this potential to sharply reduce this transaction cost through increased availability of information, greater transaction trust, and then ability to connect economic agents along the food chain. The key, however, is that we've all seen is to ensure that the digital solutions are known and are available to the farmers. So an important part of the report is trying to identify the public policies and instruments that facilitate the diffusion of digital technologies in agriculture and maximize the benefits while also reducing the risks. And we see the private sector as the key driver of the digital transformation in the sector, while the role of public sector and the governments is more to create this enabling environment for the private sector and mitigate and reduce any market failures that might arise. So this is sort of a brief overview of the key areas we focus on in our work. And I would like to conclude with a couple of general questions to start off the discussion. So one is giving you a hands-on experience in agriculture, and some of this was alluded to already. What do you see as the most promising digital technology that you see emerging and are being used that can improve the functioning of agri-food systems? If you could, name a couple of technologies you think, okay, these are the most promising ones. This is where we see the revolution coming from. What do you see as the key challenges for the diffusion of such technologies, particularly among smaller farmers? And where do you see the role of the public sector in helping of diffusing these technologies in the sector? And I guess finally, how do you see that digital agriculture and the digital transformation of the sector would look post-COVID? Do you think what's going on right now will help to make digital technology sort of a status quo in the sector, more so than it has been before? Thank you.
All right, thank you for that, Katerina, and the overview of the report. So look, we're going to open it up for questions in a second. I've received one online, but I'd like to receive a few more so I can package them. And I'm going to build on what Katerina said, and I'm going to give each of our speakers one question to wrestle with. And I'm going to try to be provocative here. And while you're doing that wrestling in front of everyone, we'll hopefully get some more questions in addition to the one that Yost sent. So, Jorge, the World Bank has just arrived in Colombia and wants to spend $100 million in the Ministry of Agriculture on digital agriculture. What should they spend it on? And what is your advice to the minister and the task team leader from the World Bank?
Well, first,
let me just ask all three questions and then you can answer first.
okay.
Okay. Kim, is B2C really going to be sustainable in the future? And what should be the role of an institution like the World Bank in promoting B2C? And Christine, should the World Bank and IFC be involved in setting up financing for early stage entrepreneurs, or is in fact the private sector the best for them to pass through to deliver good products? Right? I mean, I'm not sure if that question was clear, but it's really about the use of public money in venture capital kind of space and innovation space. Does that make sense, or is in fact the system precisely functioning because it relies on private money and the requirements exercised by the people behind that money? So think about those questions, and we'll start with Jorge.
Well, thank you, Julian. The first thing that I would say is, if I were the World Bank, give the money to the Ministry of Agriculture, because governments are too slow in terms of executing and investing the resources, even coming from an institution like yours. So I will provide those resources to the private sector. Second, what I would do, thinking that we are living in the moment of the COVID-19 and the effects on the food system in any of the countries in the world, I would say in the case of Colombia, the most important thing right now is how to connect our farmers to the consumers, because the wholesalers are going down. I just got a call and an information that the major wholesaling facility in Bogota is going to operate only 35% in the coming days, because a lot of people get infected by COVID-19. So it can create a shortage in the food supply of the most important market in the country. So what we require now is how to make our farmers able to connect directly to the retail, to the small shoppers, or to the consumers. So $1 million invested in a facility, in an application, and in a new system, innovation that is scalable and replicable, and that is affordable to the producers. Other than that, that money could be wasted, because we need solutions that are replicable for thousands of farmers, not only around Bogota, but around the country.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jorge. Now, it's important to remember that the World Bank lends to governments, and then those governments can on-lend to the private sector. But, you know, the person that's paying back the loan of the World Bank is ultimately the government.
And the taxpayers to the government.
Indeed. So, but, you know, in terms of the pitch to the ministry, telling the ministry that the minister, that she or he is too slow, not probably the best starting point for the first meeting, right? So that's something we should talk about separately. Over to Kim.
Okay, so I'm interpreting B2C meaning farmer directly to consumer. So correct me if that's the wrong perspective. Okay, hearing nothing and seeing a thumbs up, I'm going to go for it. So without any bias, Marie Claudia's commentary on digital infrastructure is mission critical. I sit 60 miles outside of New York City. I have no in-building cell phone coverage, and only because of some miracle, my house can get cable and a house 3 up the block can't. So, you know, digital infrastructure is an issue even in New York State and around the world. And I think that farmers have been screaming this for rural broadband all around the world forever, and it hasn't happened. And maybe this is the finally, because kids can't get educated and people can't work remotely from home, this will be the thing that pushes that whole infrastructure over the side. So I think that number one, that is important to making the B2C actually work. You have to be able to communicate with your potential customers. I think, what do you invest in? I think you invest in various forms of infrastructure. So creating marketplaces so that farmers can publicize to consumers that they have goods, and where they're built, you know, how you can access that either through pickup or delivery or through a marketplace. Those kinds of things I think are critical. And it's not something that any one farmer or even a collection of farmers could put together and be effective at. I think that there's a very important role in education and food safety. Part of the value chain and the people in between are often steps that help to encourage food safety, you know, eliminating spoiled foods or washing and treating or various things. And so food safety education for farmers selling directly to consumers becomes an important piece. And think about it, if you're used to going to a store and now you're going to a farmer and all of a sudden in some town there's an outbreak of E. coli or listeria or something, all of a sudden that becomes a very bad idea. And so you need to do everything you can to preserve the stability and people's faith in that system. And I think that there's a lot of shared infrastructure around food storage, so cold chain, storage facilities, really primary processing, just like washing and packing, even in volume type things that are non-trivial investments that no one farmer could invest in, but a town could, or a collection of towns could. And that would be what would be necessary to maintain a very strong B2C infrastructure for produce. So I'm talking about not prepared food, but for fresh produce and fresh animal product.
Great, thank you very much, Kim. Christine, over to you.
Sure. And I'll be very quick because I have to jump on another call here in 2 minutes. But your question about like who should fund early stage ventures, I mean, that is a very like existential question, something I've spent a large part of my, you know, education and career looking at. I definitely feel that there is a role for organizations like the World Bank and IFC and governments to come in and support early stage innovators and entrepreneurs. This is a difficult case to make for the private sector because it's high risk, mainly failure, because, you know, we're filling the funnel with promising innovations. Now, of course, through like the advancements that we've seen in this kind of innovation entrepreneurship paradigm, there is more focus on like acceleration and incubation of promising ideas. But this early stage is a very hard part of the, you know, innovation pipeline to get funded. And therefore, I think that there is a role for, you know, organizations such as you mentioned, like the World Bank and IFC. I also think that there can be you know, protocols or parameters put into the funding that basically is doing what we're seeing our TFF community doing anyway, which is like open sourcing solutions, sharing knowledge and know-how, again, to accelerate innovation efforts in their markets and around the world and reduce duplicative efforts. the big message that I champion from young people is that we don't have time to wait. We don't have time to have years of discussions around the correct policy instrument, etc. We need to have a disposition towards action and experimentation, share lessons and learning quickly, pivot, and move to the next great solution. So these are the kinds of ways of working that come naturally to entrepreneurs. How can we bring that into the fore for agricultural solution development? I think there's a lot of bridges we can start to build to share ideas and learnings and more, so that we can accelerate these efforts at this time and for other imminent issues we face, such as climate change.
Thank you so much, Christina. I know you got to jump here, but maybe you can give one quick answer to Katerina's question. What is the most promising technology that you've seen out there?
I mean, I was actually thinking about that as she was asking it. It's a very hard question to ask because, one of the things that I think is really important, especially for food and ag solution development, is that they're locally relevant. Too often we have seen solutions that are based on technology looking for a problem to solve in markets. And we believe that they should really be developed from the ground up with the specific market needs and context in mind. So that said, I don't think that the silver bullet is a particular technology, although I am excited, of course, by things like I mentioned, like AI and big data, et cetera. I think the silver bullet is around creating a new culture of openness, sharing, and collaboration. That is how we will transform how we feed the world. And if we can foster that and empower today's young people to do what they do best, which they're natural collaborators and sharers, I think that we can see, a real transformation happen, and quickly.
Thank you so much, Christine, and really appreciate your taking the time to join us. We're going to keep going, and you have a great next meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone. And please feel free to ping me on LinkedIn or by email if you would like to continue the discussion.
At the World Bank, we're trained in sending smoke signals. We're
okay, good.
days of technology, but
okay, bye.
An agile one. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so Jorge, Kim, we're starting to get the questions rolling in fast and furious. So one of them is about whether we're seeing a change in international trade patterns as a result of COVID-19. Another one is what are the innovative ways you're seeing to manage post-harvest loss in the world of COVID-19? Then I'm just going to go through a few of them, and you guys can both sort of take turns answering a couple and work off of each other. So there was a lot of talk about platforms and finding ways to connect farmers, but at the same time, we're seeing technologies being used for this, whether it's Facebook or WhatsApp. And so what additional things need to be done if it's already happening? Another point is that really getting farmers linked to consumers requires solving the aggregation problem, because it's going to be too difficult for each farmer to find each consumer, and we're going to lose all the economies of scale. So should there be a role for the public sector in helping create more efficient delivery systems? I guess we know what happened to the U.S. Postal Service here, but and then again, are we thinking PPPs along the cold chain because we have this very deconcentrated kind of framework, or is it still something that can be entirely driven by the public sector? I'll stop there. I think Katerina had also asked this question about what the role of the public sector should be, and particularly in post-COVID. So if you could weave that in. And this time we'll start with Kim, and then we'll go to Jorge. The floor is yours.
Great. So many questions. Let me give you an example of something that's actually happened in New York State that I think is pretty, well, for the U.S., it's frame-breaking. You've probably seen pictures of dairy farmers dumping literally thousands of gallons of milk onto the ground because there was no way to get it into the processing system. Well, actually, there was plenty of processing capacity there was no downstream customer. So everybody behaves economically, right? So a processor's like, I'm not going to pay for raw material and process it if I don't have a market for it. And a farmer isn't going to continue to produce if they don't have a market for it. So actually the state of New York stepped in because, as I mentioned, we have this huge unemployment issue, and the number of people showing up at food banks has increased by something like 400 or 500%. So the state is now creating a market. So they're essentially saying, we will buy at cost X, Y, and Z. The processing plants are like, okay, if you're going to cover my costs, I'm willing to be a good citizen and buy the product and process it. And so now there's this almost shadow supply chain that's coming up in a few of the, it's mostly animal protein spaces in New York State, where the state is buying the produced product, creating a market, and then bringing it to food banks in New York City. So there's this literally train of trucks, cold chain trucks going from upstate New York to downstate, bringing this food through. And so that is definitely a public sector thing. They made a market when a market couldn't be made by individual consumers. And I think that there's more opportunity to do things like that.
Great, thank you, Kim. Jorge.
Okay, in terms of the trade question, what we are seeing is many countries are closing their borders, some of them because they don't want to allow the
Okay, we lost you, Jorge. We can't hear you.
I think he's, oops, I see the triangle of death. I'll pick up on that. Yes, there's less being exported, and there's in some places less being imported because of a fear of disease coming in on the food. Even though it's unfounded, it doesn't matter sometimes. I had typed into the chat box that, you know, we all know trade agreements are focused on me selling things to you, or you selling things to me, and how much we're going to agree on that. There's actually no requirement that in a time of disaster, I still have to give you some proportion of my production. And so any country that is dependent on importing for food, almost by definition in a time of challenge, is going to have its food supply cut off, because every country is going to try to maintain its own supply. Interestingly, with the hog situation in the United States, my understanding is there's actually more whole carcasses going to China from the U.S. now, because China has processing capacity, even if they don't have the hog capacity. And so because of the demand, there's a new market. While we can't break down the carcasses here, they can break down the carcasses there. Yep, Jorge's back.
Great, thank you for jumping in, Kim and Jorge. We lost you right at the outset, so maybe you could start again on the international trade piece.
Yes, I'm sorry, I lost my internet connection. So what I was saying is that what we are seeing is some countries closing their borders to limit exports for some specific products, for instance, rice in some Asian countries. And because of in the domestic market, since we've lost thousands of consumers, and we still face imports from some other countries, like for instance, sugar and rice from Ecuador, the government is thinking, and the local producers, in also limiting the imports of some specific products, because we do not have the consumers as we had before. We have an oversupply of our products, so it's a critical condition for losing more money for our agricultural producers. That's to your first question. To the second one, in terms of what additional things can be done in terms of technology, Maria Claudia raised a critical point, and at least in developing countries, which is affordability and connectivity, because most of the rural areas, the connectivity is very expensive. So as long as we make them affordable and we can spread the connectivity, digital solutions can be implemented in the rural area. The question about the aggregation problem. needless to say, and I'm a strongly supporter of public goods, I think education is critical even for the farmers, for the smaller ones, for the ones who are old enough and they have not been involved in technology and not even in economies of scale and vertical integration. I think that the role of the government regarding the post-pandemic scenario is education and transferring knowledge and also technology to be able to build this capacity in terms of economies of scale, vertical integration, and the rationale behind the strategy from the farm to the fork. And finally, I would like to say something about the cold chain. In the case of Colombia, as I explained in the first intervention, what we saw is that we lost a lot of consumers, and products like chicken meat, pork meat, and some vegetables, basically the producers, they ran out of space in terms of storage capacity. In the case of vegetables and some specific fruits, something that might be really good, and I've told this to the Minister of Agriculture, is that the government needs a lot of products to get to those 11 million people that are in their houses who do not have any income. So the public expenditure, as the food banks or the experiences in some other places, could be implemented in Colombia. The government has the money, but we just need the logistics. So it could be a triple win for the producer, for the government, but also for the citizens who do not have any money now, but they need to get food in their households.
Great, thank you very much, Jorge. So, Kim, Jorge, a couple more questions. Have you seen any technology or efforts to overcome the labor shortage problems that we're seeing? So, one country bans import of labor from another country. We see this in the US already affecting farms dramatically, but even at local levels with travel restrictions and other things. The principle of matching labor demand and supply is just the same as any other market. And so are we seeing technologies, digital technologies, helping to solve these problems? Second question is around the idea of platforms. And so if part of the problem, as described by both of you, is that the consumers or the producers and the consumers can't find each other well enough, even though there's plenty of food, you have scarcity because people aren't meeting in a market. Does the public sector have a role in creating platforms where people can meet? And just think of it as, traditionally municipalities invested in food markets with stalls where people could go buy food and they could meet the producers and select what they wanted. Is there a role, and should there be support to financing the creation of lots of these virtual platforms for every county in the US or every municipality in Colombia? Right? And is that something useful the public sector should do? We'll start with Jorge this time and then go to Kim.
Okay, to your first question, as I think in terms of the digital technology and the labor market, we haven't seen this in Colombia. There are a couple of experiences in apps that help the farmer to run the diagnostic for plant disease. But this is something that is not in the market. I wouldn't say has replaced the labor force that we are used to see in the field. And because, as I said in my first presentation, we are a privileged sector and everyone related to the agricultural sector is working right now. But looking ahead, of course, that is one of the opportunities for entrepreneurs and also for the producers, because the social distancing will be taking place as well in the rural areas. And to your second questions, the platforms, the Minister of Agriculture recently launched a platform that is working the national government with the governors around the country, trying to connect through that platform the farmers and the consumers, but the institutional consumers in the different departments of Colombia. They invested I would say probably $9 to $10 million. It's a nice effort, but of course, the necessities that we have in control in Colombia are larger than that. But of course, it's a good initiative. But I would say my preferences, of course, is the private sector running those efforts, because the money that the government has is limited. So if you don't create an ecosystem that is self-sustainable, probably in 8 to 9 months, that platform is going to be down and not running. That's why we need, and we would like to empower the possibility of the government funding or supporting the initiative from the private sector or the young entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Jorge. Now, of course, there is a danger that you end up with things like Amazon and Jeff Bezos making $23 billion because he controls the biggest platform in the times of COVID-19. So, I think there's a very difficult question about who manages that platform and who owns it and who regulates it. That are really key for maximizing the benefits to everyone. Kim, floor is yours.
I'll point out that Mr. Bezos' platform is not spectacularly good on perishable products. So we still haven't kind of, it's great if you want a box of cereal, but not if you want a fresh banana. So there's that. Maybe I'll pick up on the digital side. I think there's a huge opportunity for robotics. And I think that this may be the thing that pushes us over the edge, especially for, I'd say, larger, more multi-acre farms as opposed to smallholder farmers. No joke, I saw something going in the chat room about, redeploying the unemployed. I will tell you that farm labor is actually skilled labor. It is not unskilled labor. You cannot just pull anybody off the street, stick them in a field, tell them how to prune a vine or pick an apple and assume it's going to happen. It's actually a skill. And the typical American is profoundly bad at it. And so you can't just take unemployed people and have them show up at a farm and assume that you're going to get picked blueberries and raspberries and apples and it's going to be of market quality. So that's just a real problem, and therefore there are many farmers that are planting less this year or just not planting. And that's one of the ways. There was a question about post-harvest waste. One way to eliminate post-harvest waste is not to grow it in the first place. In some sectors, like dairy, there's robotic milking that has actually been quite successful and it has become economical in the United States to deal with a labor shortage. There's testing now for the harvesting of apples using robots. You first have to replant your orchards so that it's a spindle. So the trees are very close together and essentially on trellises like a vineyard. And then a robot can go and literally suck the apples off as it goes down. That's being tested commercially in New Zealand and could become more small scale. I've heard of weeding robots that are in prototype that are potentially going to be useful in produce fields, especially in between the rows. So not necessarily weeding between the plants, but maintaining the in between the rows. That will be quite helpful. So I think that this may finally be the thing that pushes more robotics into farming. Now remember, to control that robot, you're going to need digital infrastructure because it's going to be GPS controlled and it's going to need to send data back and forth. And so back to Marie Claudia, if her digital infrastructure isn't in place, then all of this is just a dream, even in the established markets.
Thank you, Kim, and serious questions there about capital intensity as well, right? So how do, if you're looking at robotics replacing farm workers, there's about 500 million people out there that are going to be fully unemployed, those small farmers, because getting access to that kind of technology is a huge financial hurdle. Look, we're going to get wrapped.
But you can potentially think about, and this is where maybe more World Bank public sector can come in place. If you have a community, everybody doesn't need the robot the same day. And so if you could have community purchase of technology, and it doesn't have to be robot, any technology, sprayers, harvesters, and then either rent it to farmers So you're buying a fractional piece of it, or loan it outright to them. That might be a way to bring the technology in a more economic way.
Yeah, so the sharing economy and that whole concept is one that we've been thinking a lot about. Of course, the idea of cooperatives in agriculture is not a new one at all, but one that faces major problems. We're going to start wrapping up here. We have about 5 more minutes because I have to jump on another call. Hada, I see you posted a question. Do you want to just go ahead and ask it directly? And anyone else who actually wants to verbally ask a question?
Oh, hi. Thank you, everyone, for the great presentations. I have a question more about what type of support the public sector could provide to companies. So you made the very good point that there is a trade-off between risk reduction and also efficiency. And as we've seen from the COVID-19 shocks, disruptive risk is costly. And to build resilience, this requires a lot of effort from the company and additional costs. And we also see that this disruptive risk has a domino effect on the value chain, which means that if a disruption happens at one point of the value chain, it also has effects in other parts, which make it, in economic terms, kind of a public bad. And I wonder if this justifies public funding to help companies ex ante adapt to this type of disruptive risk. I don't know what you think about this as a potential entry point for the public sector. Does it make sense to help private companies build resilience to disruptive risk through financing, for example? Thank you.
All right, we'll go with Kim first and then Jorge, and then we'll wrap it up. Kim.
So yes, I do think there's an opportunity there. I think this tees up the fact that, look, you know, when you don't have storms and then you all of a sudden get a string of hurricanes, you invest in dealing with resiliency around hurricanes. And so you take on that cost because you know about the risk. I think with COVID, quite frankly, most people, this was not on their horizon. You know, we have not in the United States had a situation like this since 1917. So it was over 100 years ago. Most people don't remember it, and you know we just forget. So you forget to kind of build in that resiliency. I do think that at least in the United States, there's going to be public programs to reshore activities that have potentially been done offshore for the purposes of dealing with things like this. I think it's going to happen more in the manufacturing world than in the food world. But I do think that, you know, going back to my egg story, there will be more safety stock on egg cartons going forward forever, or at least for the next 50 years, while people remember.
Thank you, Kim. Over to you, Jorge.
Yeah, thank you. In the case of Colombia, we've seen 2 ways that the government has been using to support companies. To the companies in the rural economy, in the food system, the government has lended money, working capital, to support the different challenges that our producers have. Because we are up and running, that's the most privileged situation that we can have at the moment. But since we lost our consumers, and most of the consumers in Colombia lost their jobs, or basically they are not earning an income, the government has provided support to those sectors in order to assist them to pay the payroll, in a way to maintain for 3 or 4 months the possibility of those people who are not now in the lockdown at their houses still having the capacity to buy their products whenever they need it. And food, of course, is the most important. So I see a great opportunity, at least for the government of Colombia, to continue to do so to those sectors that are less possible to get back into business soon. As I said, the restaurants, the bars, the schools and the universities and some others that probably months ahead, they still will be closed. And of course, thousands of Colombians won't make any money. And that's when the government support is critical.
Fantastic, Jorge, Kim, thank you so much for a great presentation. We have about 5 more minutes. I need to go because I need to get on the next phone call here. If anyone wants to continue, please feel free to do that after I sign off. A huge thank you to both of you for, I can hear a dog barking in the background. I know it's not my dog.
It's a puppy, it's a new one.
So a huge thank you, both of you, for participating, for sharing your insights and your experience. I'm going to follow up with each of you bilaterally because I have some more questions and ideas on things that we can work on together given the shared passion for the food system. So I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you to Maria Claudia for pulling this session together. And of course, Katerina for sharing as a discussant, and Vivek for doing all the organization. Have a great day, everyone, and huge thank you from me. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jorge, and thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Maria Clara, for the invitation.
This was great. Thank you so much.